Welcome to the SOLA Network Leaders Podcast, where we amplify the voices of pastors and ministry leaders shaping a gospel future for the emerging generation of Asian Americans and beyond. We hope you enjoy hearing different perspectives from various ministry leaders throughout the U.S.
I'm here today with my friend Aaron Chung, who is the founding lead pastor of a church called Exilic. It's in the heart of New York, and they're doing amazing work over there. And Aaron is a great thinker, as well as a pastor, leader, writer, and love to have our conversation with him about a myriad of things, including culture, how it feels to minister in New York, and his friendship and the things that he learned from Tim Keller. But you can't not talk about Tim Keller if you're talking about church in New York. So, Aaron, tell the audience a little bit about your personal journey and how Exilic came into existence.
Yeah, I was born in Korea, and our family moved to the States back in '81 when I was just 2 years old, and we primarily lived in the Northeast. So I think we immigrated to Philly, and then we slowly migrated to Jersey, and then we eventually ended up about 20 minutes from Manhattan in northern Jersey, which is where I mostly grew up. Like a lot of immigrant families, we went to the church, and it was a place to, network, experience spirituality, have community, and things like that. So I had a pretty diverse cornucopia of religious experiences, I guess, in that regard. I was saved in an AG church. And so I was first introduced to Christianity in a pretty charismatic way. And so that's actually still deep in my veins. But went to a Roman Catholic church with my cousins for a little bit. And then later on in high school, I went to, at the time, which was probably the largest Korean American church in New Jersey. It was a large Methodist church where experienced a lot of transformation, change, healing, community. My closest friends are from that youth group portion of my life. That summer after I graduated from my senior year in high school, our mutual friend Tom Keller and I went on a mission trip to Mexico. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but on our towards the end of our time, so we were in a village by the beach, and we actually the two of us got caught in a riptide together, and we were actually both drowning together.
My.
And yeah, it was, I mean, the both of us thought we were going to die. There are no lifeguards or anything like that. And to make a super long story short, we were miraculously saved, and we both passed out. We woke up in the emergency room the next day with like tubes in our arms and in our nose and an IV bag and things like that. And laughing hysterically because we should have died, but God saved us. And it's no coincidence that the both of us went into ministry.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when you experience something like that, where you have a near-death experience, it obviously changes you a lot. Tom was already on that path, and I think for me, it solidified that path for me a little bit more. And so that was my calling into ministry. Went to college, had a wonderful experience. After that, went overseas to do missionary work, and then went to seminary. And then during my doctorate of ministry work, met my wife, and my wife has a lot of church friends, unchurched friends, and de-church friends. And so when we were dating, engaged and married, they knew she was dating, engaged and married to me. They started asking a lot more questions about the faith. And she was just like, I don't know the answer. Just talk to Aaron. And so this is back now in 2012, 2013, when The Reason for God had just come out by Tim Keller. And so I thought it'd be cool if we just did a book club. And so once a month, we got together to discuss a chapter. There was like wine and cheese, and we would just talk over the chapter, and they took it seriously. And And it was really good. And we met for over a year with this book club. And then I think that's when some of the thoughts started germinating within me about how cool it would be if there were more of these kinds of conversations taking place where we can have honest questions, safe spaces to talk about Christianity. And then that's when I started thinking it'd be cool if there was another church, because there are churches that do this, but there was another church that could contribute to really the seekers and skeptics in our city. And so that was sort of the genesis of our church's beginnings 10.5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many follow-up questions. It's ironic. Tom does baptism at the beach, so I don't know what he's thinking.
I know. So I was actually sharing this in my sermon last Sunday because it was about courage and bravery and the disciples who were afraid on the boat during the storm. And I was telling our church that the following summer, I went back to the beach. And, like I love surfing and things like that. But the following summer, I was scared to get back in the water again because of what I had just experienced. And I thought to myself, like, if I don't go in now, I'm never going to go back in again. And usually whatever you avoid is controlling you. And I didn't want the ocean to control my life. And so I forced myself to jump back in the ocean. And so I'm sure Tom did the same. And he's able to do baptisms down the beach.
Yeah, I'll have to ask him about it the next time I see him.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Tom is, a lot more of a feeler, although, he's a smart guy too. And you feel, but you started your church and your tagline is thinkers welcome. And it is appropriate that the genesis of how you began active evangelistic ministry is the book club. Tim Keller talks about that. Very New Yorkish, very Northeast-ish. Tell us about why that tagline, this idea of thinking, resonates with New Yorkers. And and why is it that though there are many, many people who attempt a church plant in New York, the majority don't survive after 2, 3, 5 years. But you not only have survived, but you're thriving. Yeah. So tell us about Thinkers Welcome and, what resonates with New York from Exilic.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I would say is Tom and I are probably cut from the same cloth in the sense that we can think, obviously, but we're both actually a lot more feeling oriented, including myself. Even on my Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENFJ, but I'm the heaviest on the F. And so even for me, like I'm not naturally wired that way. Having said that, I know our city is, and I'm a missionary to our city to a certain degree. And so what does it look like to contextualize a church here? And so our mission is to inspire thinkers to believe and to inspire believers to think. And I don't know if I would have that same kind of tagline, as it were, if we were in another portion of the country. Not that they don't think, but every region of our country has different, cultural milieu. And so like in the South, for example, there's a lot of cultural Christianity. And so my mentality as a missionary down there would be, how do I convince people that go to church that they might not even be Christian? And so that's very different from here, right? So, but it works well here in the sense that New Yorkers in general, I think everyone would say this, we're naturally cynical. A part of that is survival mode. We don't want to get ripped off or something happened to us. And so there's always this sort of cynicism that's sort of on a subterranean level that's always like lurking, within us. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. It can be, but at the same time, it can be a good thing too, in the sense that there isn't sort of this, we might not suffer as much as from like an easy believism or a fideism, but there is a healthy suspicion, and not even just doubting, but learning to even doubt your doubts, as Tim Keller would say, which I think is healthy. And so So we try as best as we can to thoughtfully, winsomely, and in a nuanced way articulate obviously the gospel, but in addition to that, the scriptures as a whole and cultural issues too. And so we try our hardest as best as we can to do that, and people appreciate that.
So part of what you're saying is that you didn't come with a preset playbook of how to reach the city, but you had to customize it for New York City.
Yeah, and I mean, it helps that I didn't parachute here from somewhere else in the country or the world. I mean, I grew up here. I know the nomenclature. I know the ethos of New York, and so the learning curve wasn't very high. If anything, I had the benefit of being an insider and an outsider because I grew up here, so I understand the ethos of the city. But I've also lived outside of the city for 12, 13, 14 years, and so that also gives me an outsider's perspective. When I moved back, it was helpful to see the city from a fresh perspective. The David Foster Wallace, this is water commencement speech where the two fish are swimming by and the older fish, goes past them and goes, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And then the two fish are like, "What's water?" Because they've been swimming in it for so long, they don't see it anymore. Living outside the city has also helped me get fresh perspective on the cultural tides that we swim in.
Okay. New York is probably the epicenter of the country in terms of culture and power and things of that nature. It is not only a predictor of culture, but it's an influencer of culture. New York and maybe Los Angeles. So what is it that you are seeing in New York right now? Even among Asian Americans, they were there for a few years. And I remember we used to have people who live in New York for a few years, and then when they have kids, they move out and they get burnt out of their career over there. They try to find something in the suburbs. What is it that you are seeing in New York and how that's impacting how you disciple them, reach them, evangelize to them, form them?
Yeah, so I mean, to your first point about cities like New York and LA sort of leading the culture, I still think that's true. I do think a flattening has taken place a little bit. So I was actually talking about this with some friends last night, and we were talking about there was an article that the writer Aaron Wren wrote a couple years ago about how we're no longer in a positive world, a neutral world, but we live in a negative world. And one of the things that Keller would say is, well, New York has always been a negative world. It's not like we were not ever a negative world. It's just that now the rest of the country sort of feels like it's in a negative world. And so the way that you respond to that, matters. And so I do think that maybe the city's major urban centers may have been a decade or two ahead. I do sense a flattening out that has taken place. Part of it is social media and the internet and things like that. Having said that, I still think that major urban centers do kind of lead the charge. I mean, we're certainly not behind, that's for sure. And so, I guess the next question is, in what ways are we sort of leading that charge? Is it politically? Is it like what thought related things are we leading the charge with? And I don't know. I've been thinking about that question myself. I do know that, and again, this is happening in other parts of the country, but a friend of mine started a group called For NYC, and they did a joint partnership with Barna. And they saw that in New York and probably with the rest of the country, there has been a resurgence of spirituality, particularly with Gen Z. And we have concrete data with New York in particular with Gen Z. It's gone from 10% who identify as Christians in 2022 to 27% in 3 years. Yeah. And most of them, again, are young men who lean a little bit politically right. And we also know that in terms of the way that people view the church, it's gone from negative to more positive. That's at least for New York City, and I suspect that that's happening throughout the country as well. And I have lots of thoughts on that. But we've certainly been seeing that in our own church too, because our church at one point used to be like 80% women. It's probably like 60-40 now, and there's a hunger. I think this does beg the question, like, women have not tapered off, but they haven't increased at the same amount as young men. And so one of the questions is like, why isn't that happening? And why are young men in particular being attracted to church, and why do they tend to lean a little bit more politically right? That's for another conversation. But those are some of the things that we're seeing. I do think that one thing that is going to be important is that as we kind of have all these cultural issues constantly take place, one thing that's really important for us in the city is that we have to constantly remain with our answers very nuanced and winsome. I do sense that because of the negative world that we live in, everyone wants sort of black and white answers. And everyone wants to know that you land on a firm position. And so there's almost a simplicity with the way that we respond to things. And I'm not going to get political, but I think one of the reasons why Donald Trump has been so appealing is that he's very simple in the way that he communicates, and it's very black and white. And I think there's a draw for things like that. But life is very complex, and there's a lot more gray. And so just the way that we articulate things has to be done continuously in a nuanced way. And I do think that if you're going to survive in places like New York, you have to be nuanced as much as possible. But sometimes I sense that our culture at large wants more simple things and things that are more black and white. It's just, the world is just too complex and complicated for those kinds of answers.
And so now, let me then follow up on your particular answer there and part of what you were saying before. There's been a renewed interest or resurgence in faith, especially among men. And we've been reading about that through Barna and Glue and things of that nature, but Gen Z men in particular. Some attribute that to the divide that's happening in the country that's empowering men to be angry, to make things simple for them. But and you understand that, and then you see the resurgence of men. By the way, I've asked that particular question to other people who lead ministries in urban settings, and they've echoed what you're saying, that the people who are coming from the colleges, etc., they're having more men than before, relative to women. Now, but you also say that you have to be nuanced, so that, for example, if a debate was going on surrounding Palestine or immigration or Israel or things of that nature, I'm sensing what you're saying is sometimes the world wants a simplistic answer. Here's the good and here's the evil. But that's not reality, and you have to nuance it. Oftentimes, the people who nuance it are the ones who are shouted down or ignored, are sidelined from discourse. But how is it that it's worked for Exilic and you?
Well, again, I think that if you are nuanced, and again, this is not, sometimes the third way-ism gets critiqued. It's not this, it's not that, but it's this. But there is some merit to it, I think, and so it's really important that if you do it in a thoughtful way, it can sort of open up eyes. But the temptation is to be a lot more simple in the way that you respond to things. But hopefully if you do it in a nuanced, winsome way, because you could still be nuanced and kind of a jerk too. So I think the tone is going to have to matter a lot too in the way that we communicate things. And so there has to be a winsomeness to the way that you also talk about nuance things.
Okay, and you've made it work. I remember attending a conference a few decades ago, maybe 2 decades ago, 2.5. And the talk is about postmodernism at that time, and that we're at a postmodern and it's no longer science, whatever. Or yeah. And, they were talking about some of the writings and trends, etc. But then it was predominantly Asian American leaders, some of the prominent Asian American leaders of the time. We asked the question, okay, do you hear the national trends? But for you on boots on the ground, when you're looking at your people, does your congregation reflect what we're reading? And almost to a T, people were saying, no, we're probably about 10, 15 years behind the dominant or the majority culture. You are not only in New York, but your congregation, largely Asian American or a lot of Asian Americans. How are you interpreting culture through your Asian American lens, or do you have to contextualize it a little bit?
I mean, contextualization for sure. That there is no doubt. I do sense that. I mean, maybe 20, 25 years ago, I guess you could say we were definitely behind in sort of adopting where our culture was going. Even there, though, I probably sense a little bit of a flattening out that is taking place.
Okay.
And I think one example of that is, I mean, what is the number one film on Netflix right now? It's K-pop Demon Hunters. And so there's a sense in which now we are influencing culture as well in a very strong mainstream culture in a very like large way. And so there's also like you didn't get that feeling as much 20 years ago. And so that's also taking place too. And so, but in general, I do think that there has been a flattening out that has taken place. Contextualization is still really, really key in the way that you communicate things. That never stops.
And so when some of our leaders are listening to this podcast, and then they're also reading the Barna Report or listening to Carey Nieuwhof, etc. How much do they need to contextualize what they're reading to their congregation, to their local setting? And you're right. I mean, having a church in the South is different from having a church in the Northeast. And your geography probably matters more than your ethnic makeup when it comes to that. But how much should they interpret that with their geographical, sociological, income, ethnic demographic in mind?
A lot. Yeah, I mean that should never stop. And that I don't know if that has anything to do with like adopting this culture slowly or anything like that, so much as like the makeup of our identity and who we are. And so that should never stop in terms of the way. So if this is helpful at all, like I was reading an article that Trevor Wax wrote, and he was talking about how it's important to articulate the gospel through the lens of the culture. So in a way where our culture can understand the gospel. So we had to articulate the gospel in a way that's understandable for the culture, but at the same time, we had to do the reverse. We have to sort of exegete the culture through the lens of the gospel too.
Absolutely.
So you have to, you kind of have to do both. And there are different ways that people experience culture, again, depending on your ethnic makeup, depending on where you live, and where you have to carefully do both. So yes to that, like you have to do it a lot. And so you have to be a really good student of articulating the culture to your demographic, and then also articulating the culture as well, the gospel.
Yeah, so someone in the South, like you said, might be a narcissist, self-absorbed, and certain idols, and it may show itself in their involvement with religion and very so-called cultural Christian. Whereas in an urban center or in Boston or places like that, it may come off as intellectualism, kind of snobbery against faith. So it's the same sin and idol, but it expresses itself differently in your context. And we have to, and for the person in the South who may misunderstand that to be godliness and piety, but it's not. And we have to call it out a little bit.
Yeah, I heard this line. I don't even remember who said it a couple of days ago, but they said, your ability to change depends upon how much truth you can handle about yourself.
Mm.
If you can't handle the truth about yourself, you cannot change. And so that's really important in terms of just self-awareness, sanctification. Like your ability to change really depends upon how much truth you can handle about yourself. So for sure.
Okay, that's profound. Aaron, we can't talk about New York and culture without mentioning Tim Keller. And his name still comes up all over the place. He's still teaching us, forming us from the ground. You had the immense privilege of having a relationship with him. And correct me if I'm wrong, but when he was sidelined a little bit, you taught his class, or you got involved in his class, and you read some of his unpublished notes and things of that nature. And so you got a better glimpse into how he thinks and how he views the future. What did you learn from Keller, especially as someone who is interpreting the New York culture and doing ministry there? How has it shaped you? What are some insights that you might have that surprise, inspired, or is instructive for the rest of us?
Yeah, I mean, I probably got more glimpses of him than any like strong relationship with him. I was hanging out with some Redeemer guys last night, and they have a strong relationship with him because they were serving with him in the same church. But I got more glimpses of Tim, and I was uh, privileged enough to teach a couple of his lectures because he was getting sick towards the end. One was a class called Christianity, uh, the Christian Life in a Secular Age. And so I was able to get some of his notes to teach the class, which was like, I think 500 or 600 pages on various topics, whether it's sexuality, justice, race, things like that. And it's honestly dynamite, the contents. And I think that's the part where, I mean, he always kind of comes across very professorial. He kind of even looks like Professor X. But he was a true pastor scholar. But he was more than just that. I mean, the school that my girls go to right now on the Upper West Side was started by some original Redeemer people. And even there, you see Tim's fingerprints because one of the reasons why a lot of people leave the city is because of education. You know, how can I raise a family here? And so even there, you see the ripple effects of how Tim sort of made an imprint on our city by starting a school that my girls go to this day. I think one thing that doesn't get talked about enough is that obviously he was a great preacher. I don't think most people realize that he was also a really good fundraiser. And fundraising is really important for movements. And he was able to really steward his power and influence in a way to fundraise for different institutional endeavors, which are really important for lasting movement to take place without vanishing, because it's not centered around any individual. And so and he was also one of those people that are better in person than, you know, in private than in public even. So, yeah, his fingerprints are all over here. One interesting thing that a lot of people might not know is that he lived in Roosevelt Island, which is a part of Manhattan. But it was kind of like it was his own separate island too, and so he was able to sort of be in the chaos of Midtown, as it were, and then he was able to also retreat to Roosevelt Island, which I think was really helpful for him too and his family, just for some oasis in the midst of the craziness that's the city too. And so, yeah, but his legacy continues. I don't think there's one person here in our city that can fill in those giant shoes, but um, we've all bought into the vision and our heart for the city, and so the collegiality and the health of the ecosystem is bright. Um, everyone is here for the city. And so, yeah, his ripple effects are gigantic over here.
He created, correct me if I'm wrong, culture in the city where you have, like you said, you're cordial to those who are in opposition even. Respectful, dialoguing, etc. So even to the most ardent secularist or those who may be on the political or moral spectrum as far apart as you can be. But more importantly, he was respectfully cordial to those who are theologically maybe different, but in a way that in their closeness, like they were learning from him and what Redeemer and the such are doing. And so if you are standoffish or critical or competitive, that was seen as abnormal. Am I reading that correct? I mean, I hear that from you, from Abe and others. Am I representing correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think our apologetic is not just the content of what we say, but it's the tone in which we say it too, which is equally, because sometimes you meet apologists and defenders of the faith are just it kind of rubs you the wrong way. And so really being able to disarm someone with humility and tone and love, which is probably the greatest apologetic, is really important in persuading anyone to believe in something, especially if you think it's the truth, without offending them in any way. I think the other thing that Tim had too, and sometimes we can sometimes miss this because he's not super charismatic, and he's not like pacing the stage where he's talking, and he's not yelling or anything like that. But one of the things that people used to say about George Whitefield was, like skeptics, they would say, I don't know if I believe in what he's saying, but he makes me want to believe it because he believes in it so much. And that was Tim. Like, so even if he wasn't like charismatic and yelling, like there is this like, oh, you could tell he really, really believes in this, which is why sometimes when uh, younger preachers like myself, we try to sort of rip off Tim or try to clone Tim, and we're saying the exact same things that he's saying. It just doesn't hit the same way because we don't believe in it as much as he does, you know. And so he was able to sort of be this like um, tour de force without having to yell because you just knew he really believed in it. And I think that was also very like it made people want to believe too.
That's great. Thank you. Aaron, your church, Exilic, it's the church that most of us refer our people to if they go to New York. Apologies to other pastors in New York. If this interview was being shown on the screen this coming Sunday, and our pastor did a podcast, and here's the last 2 minutes of that podcast, would you give a shout out to your people?
Yeah, I was actually on Instagram today, and I don't know if you remember the show The Office. I mean, it goes back like 20 years, and it was a show that I think it had a good 9-year run. And two of the guys were talking, Rainn Wilson and Ed Helms, who play Andy and Dwight Schrute. And they were actually they were talking about the show and just reflecting back on it. And there was a line that Andy or Ed Helms says in the show that they were talking about, and Andy goes, in the show, he goes, I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them. And when he said that, they were just talking about that line. I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them. And like ministry it's crazy. It always is. But for me, I know I'm in the good old days. And I think one way of knowing that you're in the good old days and one way of not having regret about leaving or, not, appreciating it more is to have a sense of gratitude every day, a deeper sense of gratitude for the good old days that you're in right now. And so I would say that to our church. These are the good old days for me. This past Sunday was probably the loudest I've heard our church ever sing. And what's interesting is that it was just a normal Sunday. There was nothing special going on. It wasn't like an anniversary service or Easter. It was just an ordinary, normal Sunday. But there was a hunger in our community. There's probably some pain in our community too, but there is a zeal and a thirst for God that is sweeping and moving in our midst. And you can feel it when you come here. And I love that about our community and what God is doing and all the things that we have that are in store. I'm so proud of our community. Our community should be proud of itself too. And so, yeah, these have been the good old days that we're in.
Oh, Aaron, thank you so much for our time together. Thank you for your leadership, not only at Exilic, New York City, within the denomination, PCA denomination, and with SOLA Network. I find it an honor to serve alongside of you on the council, and I look to you to continue to counsel me, actually, in how we ought to proceed. But grateful for you, grateful for our time. I trust that our people, those who listen, will learn a great deal from you and what God is doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the SOLA Network Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a follow on Facebook or Instagram at SOLA Network, or visit us at our website at www.sola.network.